Hello everyone, my name is Anthony Mahady and this is my curriculum review for Tectonics. The class I'm looking at is a 9th grade honors earth science class. It's the plate tectonics unit, and I'm looking into this unit specifically because it's part of our standards this year, but our standards are changing for next year and it's one that is staying with us. So I wanted to evaluate this whole project with that bridging concept in mind. So organizing centers. The organizing center articulated through our unit is there's 22 learning targets on a sheet of paper that we give all of our students. We don't specifically say title, essential question, and big idea. We just have that list of learning targets. The organizing center for the tectonics unit of study is tectonics as a phenomena, where we spend the unit trying to explore how this giant idea is supported by the scientific community and why it's the current accepted theory. The organizing center is aligned with the learning processes discussed in our department. So in our science department, we've really focused on using evidence to support reasoning, to really show that every claim needs to have evidence for it to be legitimate. The organizing center supports student learning because the appeal in learning about tectonics is the gateway into understanding about how species like dinosaurs and ancient things that are extinct now were able to survive on Earth. We can begin to understand why the Earth looks the way it does, and we can predict what it's going to look like in the future. So consideration 2, looking at alignment to the standards. The tasks in this unit are very closely tied to the standards. We specifically cover all benchmarks in the Earth and Space Science Tectonics standard from the old Minnesota State standards. We look at benchmarks 9.3.1.1.1 all the way through 9.3.1.1.5, so all 5 of those. The standard reads, understand the relationships among earthquakes, mountains, volcanoes, fossil deposits, rock layers, and ocean features provide evidence for the theory of plate tectonics. Since all the standard says is to understand, I'm going to focus on the tasks listed in the benchmarks. So the benchmarks mention things like compare and contrast, use modern data, use evidence, explain, those types of keywords. So we have different assignments and projects throughout the unit that hit specifically on those language. So things like our seismic activity, where we look at real data from places in California, creating our seafloor map, showing how we can explain how the seafloor is spreading by creating that map. We have a plate tectonic boundary chart that we use, so we can explain and compare and contrast the differences between plate boundaries. Benchmarks that are taught and assessed are clearly separated and identified from those that are just assessed. For example, since we're an honors class, we've added a couple days on igneous rocks, although those don't show up in the Minnesota State standards for 9th grade. We spend a short amount of time learning about them and do a lab about them to practice our understanding. We do a small formative assessment, lab partner quiz, to check understanding, but don't assess it on our major summative assessments. Other things like type of plate boundaries, which we spend more than a week on, and multiple activities learning about, those are found in the summative assessments. Okay, consideration 3, standards placement and emphasis. So all the standards pertaining to plate tectonics are taught and assessed in our unit, and additional benchmarks are taught and assessed as well, as previously stated. Students have ample opportunity to practice all of the skills. While not directly a 9th grade standard, we begin our year on a research unit. So we explore different ways to research, we look at bias, we look at citing sources, using evidence, determining if this is a legitimate article, if this supports our ideas, things of that nature. We put our plate tectonic unit in the middle of the year because it's an 8th grade standard as well. So we try to put it in the middle of the year where it's not completely gone from their minds, and it's something that they're still familiar with to kind of keep them going through the middle of the year. As mentioned above, we start our year diving into research and evidence based on reasoning headfirst, and practice those skills in every unit. A project we use in this unit is called the Scribe project, which is basically extremely detailed notes with links, graphs, videos, explanation. It's like really over-the-top Cornell notes. So they continue to practice these research skills and these evidence skills that we've taught, and especially during the Scribe project in this unit. Standards placement reflects appropriate practice because we start our year creating a foundation based on research and evidence, as I've said. We continue to build upon these skills in explaining and describing the differences in all of our standards, which is basically the language used all year long. Okay, consideration 4, assessments. So multiple and varied assessments are used throughout the entirety of the unit. Students are assessed often and in multiple ways, including all 4 of the assessments listed. The information recall quizzes based on notes, creating products on the play boundary chart, which analyzes different features, real-life examples, pictures, and processes, to a play boundary race where students are in groups working together to demonstrate their knowledge while also analyzing the process and how to move faster along the race. So we hit all 4 of those different forms or types of assessments, if you will. The assessments use the language that's mirrored in the standards. So we ask kids to explain. We ask kids to compare and contrast. We ask kids to describe. So that's literally taken right from the standard and put into our assessments. Multiple assessments are given throughout, some covering just one benchmark and others encompassing many benchmarks. Students have 2 projects throughout the unit as well, which offer a great opportunity for formative feedback on their growth throughout the unit. So the first one is the Scribe project, which I've talked about, and then a tutorial project as well. And if you're an avid person, you're familiar with tutorials or TRFs. So we do basically explain this learning target to me, teach this learning target. That's our tutorial project. So we start the unit off with a couple diagnostic assessments in the form of study guides, we call them. These are things that were covered in 8th grade that are the building blocks of play tectonics. So we'll look at those and just get a good gauge as to where our kids are, how much they know, what we need to work on. There are formative assessments through the unit, and in those projects I mentioned, the Scribe project, the tutorial project, we get a chance to give formative feedback to the students so they understand where they're at, so we understand where they're at in this entire process. We have a summative assessment in form of a test, just your classic test at the end of the unit. Diagnostic assessments in the form of study guides, as I mentioned, and we'll spend the first couple minutes of class every day going back and basically checking in on what we need to from those diagnostic assessments. So if we're really struggling on seafloor spreading, then we're going to have to spend more time the next day going over seafloor spreading, whereas maybe one class is totally crushing it on seafloor spreading based on their study guides, so we can just jump right into the new material. Okay, performance assessments. So both the Scribe project and the tutorial project, as I've mentioned, both produce learning by requiring the students to research and explore different topics, but also measure the learning of depth of knowledge in both projects. Oh, sorry, my bullets got cut off a little bit there. Both of these projects are used in the curriculum, and once they're turned in and feedback has been given, students use these as tools to recapture the material they've missed, but also it's great to give to other students. So if I'm struggling with a topic and you've done a tutorial project on it, I'm going to watch your tutorial project because it's just an extra help for me to understand the topic. Our summative assessment at the end of the unit focuses on big ideas of the unit, hits major points articulated in the standards. There isn't anything that is assessed that isn't taught and assessed. We try to be really true to that. As mentioned earlier, all of the standards for this unit are met in multiple ways of learning, and the unit tries really hard to build upon the standards that were hit in 8th grade. We love rubrics. This is a rubric that we use for our tutorial project. So you can see it's broken down into different categories, and then descriptions of what gets you each type of point is there as well. Okay, instruction. We try to make our directions as explicit and as obvious as possible, but admittedly a fault of mine is that I can tend to overcomplicate directions and make it too structured. So that's something that I'm working on this year, is to try to just hold back a little bit and let the students really dive into the directions and understand what they're doing. As mentioned before, we've created assignments to specifically align to the language shown in the standard. So we emphasize the need to explain, compare and contrast, describe. We take that literally directly from the standard. The lessons address content and process a lot, focusing on a lot of remembering certain vocabulary to describe plate boundaries, and using the process of explaining and using evidence and resources in their projects, the tutorial and scribe. But we probably don't harp on dispositional thinking as much as we should. Thinking about how to think about this. We try to give a lot of models and a lot of examples, but we could probably do a little bit more of them sitting back, taking themselves and looking at their own learning and doing that a little bit more. Okay, resources that support instruction. So we have very carefully chosen modern data that will be easy access for students to do, like the seismic project. So we take real life data that's pretty simple. We simplify it down a little bit so that they can understand using resources and using evidence, and that really hits the benchmark of using modern earthquake data to explain how seismic activity is evidence for the process of subduction. So it's literally right there. Like we found that data, so it could perfectly match that benchmark. We use an online textbook that is not your classic textbook. It's basically like this depository of different things that we can put in there. So this chapter is really good from this book. This is a really good article. We'll basically put that all together in our online textbook. It allows us to pick and choose what we want. We've created a lot of resources based on the depth of knowledge we want our students to know. We've eliminated the old textbook just because it didn't cover everything we wanted it to. So we've taken bits and pieces of there, but we've really eliminated a lot of that old textbook. Lastly, success with your curriculum. So we've organized the curriculum in two ways. I've talked about learning targets a little bit. There's a picture on the right for you. We've created a schedule that outlines what we're planning to do every day. So the kids know every single day what's on their plate. And that learning target, the learning target sheet, like I mentioned. There was a professional development at the school regarding the idea of learning targets years before I was there. But the idea of learning targets has come a long way since then. So we continue tweaking them and changing them. And as you can see, there's like 6 active links on there. And that's something we've been working on a lot more, listing out key terms, but also giving tons of resources as well. We've realized over the past couple of years that students struggle using evidence. So we've really tried hard to push our students to use evidence to support their claims. We introduced that idea a lot earlier in the year, and we focus on it literally from our first unit. So we're just hitting the kids right away with that evidence-based reasoning stuff. We keep all the tutorial and the scribe projects in a folder so that students can go back to them throughout the year and like study for a final or study for the test or access someone else's so they can see them. I don't leave my feedback on that because I want that to be like a private conversation between me and the student. But that's something I could do for like the next year, is have this folder of all the projects, just take the names off of them and leave the feedback on there. So that's a good idea for moving forward. Okay, overall my curriculum is, I would say, is of good quality in this unit because of how strongly it's aligned to the standards. I've said a bunch how it takes literally directly from the standards. All of the action words, explain, describe, compare and contrast, we use all the time in our assessments. We've just tried really hard recently to focus on the proof, the evidence part of science, to support the claims that we're using. We're using different strategies for formative assessments, but that's definitely something that we can grow in. I mentioned a couple times that we use different strategies, but it's a really big unit and there's a ton of content here. So I feel like some more maybe simplistic formative assessments would be really good for us. I'd also like to organize them based on diagnostic and formative and summative, just to see how many we have of each and where we need to focus and where we need to add. Maybe it's more diagnostic than I thought. Maybe it's more formative, simplistic assessments. But overall, I'm happy with this unit and where it's at, and some more work will make this a really solid unit, I think. All right. That was my curriculum review of 9th grade honors earth science plate tectonics. Thanks for watching.